All right. Hey, welcome to Radically Unstuck. My name is Brian Forsyth. Welcome to the podcast where we try to get you, the listener, to figure out what is keeping you stuck, what is keeping you in your chair, what is keeping you from living a life that you would gladly fight for. That's the purpose of this podcast. And I want to tell you, we have a fantastic guest today, Emily Splichal. She's not just an entrepreneur. She's not just a caring soul. She's a podiatrist. She's an entrepreneur. She is going to bring the fire and hopefully light a fire under you, because that is what this is about. And with that, I want to bring her on. Emily, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of why you do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. And hello to everyone who's tuning in. As Brian had mentioned, my name is Dr. Splichal. I am a podiatrist, but within podiatry, I'm very much of a black sheep. I challenge a lot of dogma. I challenge what was taught to me throughout podiatry school and graduate school, and really whatever someone says, I question it, and then I seek out if that is truly the answer, or if there's other ways that potentially what I'm learning could be applied, or really the science behind it. This means that as a podiatrist, I actually don't support supportive footwear. I don't support orthotics. Obviously, there are exceptions. And I'm a huge advocate of natural movement. I've traveled all around the world to over 40 countries, teaching other doctors about how I look at the human movement, human body, how I look at feet, and really the power of barefoot science. That's a little bit about my background, and lived in New York City for 20 years building my brand. And now I just recently moved to sunny Arizona.
Sunny Arizona, sunny, hot Arizona. I think off air, you said it was 100 and what?
117 is the high that it's pretty hot.
All right. Shout out to all you people living in South Dakota right now. So clearly you are living an amazing life, and I want to thank you for doing what you're doing, but I want to talk about, who you were when you were 16, 17 years old. And did you always want to be a doctor, or did you really want to be a real estate agent?
So I am originally from North Dakota, so a very small town. I grew up and spent majority of my life in a town of 300 people in North Dakota. So obviously you can imagine how isolated that is. This is also not the time during internet and social media. So really the perspective of the world was very much disconnected. China seemed literally like a whole nother world. New York City seemed like a whole nother world away. But at that point, at 16 or growing up in North Dakota, I did not want to be a doctor originally. I knew that I wanted to get out of North Dakota. That was my biggest driver, whatever that was. And to me, what freedom or power is knowledge. It is my perspective. That's just how I always looked at it, that, I grew up also very poor. I grew up on food stamps in a trailer court, and kind of the bottom of the bottom of, North Dakota wealth scale. And I knew that I didn't want to stay in that environment from a economic perspective, but also from a cultural perspective, from what North Dakota could potentially offer me for the rest of my life. So my focus as a teenager was, what do I need to do to get out of here? And that was education. Be smart, get good grades, study, read, and get accepted into a university that would bring me outside and open doors and introduce me to the world.
Well, I think it's really interesting. You're a doctor. You're thinking about, what you're going to do, and like at the time when you were thinking about your exit plan, was being a doctor even on the radar, or were you just, I'm trying to get out of I'm trying to get out of this place as soon as I can. And, if that means being an old rigger in Dallas, then, that's where I'm headed.
No, so I actually had wanted to be a lawyer. So I worked for a law firm when I was a teenager, and that was just my dream to be a lawyer. I think probably Law and Order or something was on TV, and that was a career that I could connect to. Because again, in North Dakota, we don't have investment bankers, or like I wouldn't know what a venture capitalist is or private equity or any of those that I was introduced to years later in New York City. To me, the profession was lawyer. I guess you could have said doctor would be another high revenue kind of ticket out of North Dakota. But to me, within the circle of reality, law seemed like the easier direction.
So if you were going to go into law, what area were you going into? Did you want to be a divorce lawyer, or did you like what was your expertise going to be?
I mean, at that point, I was just like, oh, like it seems cool on TV, right? Litigation, where law is actually very little litigation. But I also just thought that, like crime scene based novels were something that I was really into, like mystery and movies. Like I loved that. So to me, law was kind of that characteristic. Of course, fast forward when I go to university and was studying law, I was like, this is not like on TV. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And then I had eventually switched my major.
So take me down, take me to where you have to break it to your mom and dad, because I'm guessing that they were pretty interested in the fact that you wanted to be a lawyer, and now you're about to switch. Was that something they supported? Like, okay, go be a lawyer, go be a doctor, or was it like, wait a minute, is this really what you want to do? What they have to say about that?
Well, so there was a disappointment in that, but there's a few more steps. I went to undergrad in Minnesota, so that was my ticket out of North Dakota, is to go to the next state over, which that's not a ticket out of North Dakota. So really, I should have just gone further. I was accepted to a university in New York. I was accepted into NYU, and I didn't go because I wanted to stay near my parents. Of course, my parents never came and visited me. So I really should have not gone to Minnesota, because
I'm so sorry,
like
Emily.
I know the whole point was that my parents would visit me, and then they didn't. But it's okay. It's okay. Life unfolds itself, in these interesting ways. So after going to undergrad for pre-law and realizing I didn't want to do law, I still liked science. So I liked science, math, law, like those all kind of come together. So my university actually had one of the few forensic science degrees. So CSI, another TV show, but it wasn't on at that time. So they were like, Emily, you would be perfect for this new program, forensic science. And I just ate it up. Like I actually got various awards for being, a female in a male driven career track. Like,
oh, wow.
It was really cool. I went to, homicide scenes. I was 20 years old and I'm going to homicide scenes. And then I did
good on you. I can't do that. Sorry.
I know. I did an internship with the medical examiner. And for 6 months, I sat in autopsies in Minneapolis and their Hennepin County. And I was just like, it was intense to be 20 years old and seeing all of that. But I loved it. I ate it up. That was totally the side of law that I needed to be at. And, fast forward, I eventually end up in New York for forensics. And then I am in the lab. So I'm doing forensic DNA research, which is not sexy because you can't see DNA.
Right.
So I'm like pipetting and working with DNA, and you're essentially just moving air around all day in this cold little lab with a white coat on.
Right.
And, you would spend days working with this DNA, and then you realize, several weeks later that you contaminated the DNA with your DNA. And you're just like, I can't even see the DNA. Like it
Right.
was just so, it was
Do you
so
have smaller
frustrating.
tweezers? Do you have some?
Exactly. Pretty much. And so my parents were super proud of the fact that I was going to forensics because it was cool. It was, I think CSI maybe came out. So it's like a sexy profession, right? My daughter, I'm from North Dakota. She lives in New York City and she's, CSI.
Right.
I quit that. I
Oh,
left
man.
because I was not happy working with essentially crime and death. Like it's a very morbid profession. Um,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, so I left it and became a personal trainer. And I had to tell my parents. My dad was so disappointed.
Oh, man. Yeah, because it's a weird thing. I actually I have a boy, and I can definitely relate to, he's going to be this, he's going to be that, and then he goes and does it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm telling all my friends, and I'm like, oh, he's doing all this cool stuff, and then he comes home and says, I'm going to be a carpet salesman. And you're like, what? So I can kind of relate. But so how was that? Like, how did you navigate that once you're going and you're about to go tell the parents that you were quitting this incredibly boring and mostly unsexy job?
Yeah.
And how was
Yeah. I mean,
that?
at that time I was 21. So I'm, young. I had just moved to New York City for this forensic career. And I was going to go to graduate school and get a PhD in forensic science. And then I left. So I'm 21 in New York City. And I started looking at medical schools. There's not a lot of medical schools in New York City. And for
Really?
me, what was feeding my soul at that time in my life, at this point I was 23 years old. What was feeding my soul was being in New York City. And New York City is a very anonymous, accepting city. And I needed that at that moment of just my life and what I was going through. So for me to go to medical school, the requirement is it had to allow me to still be within New York City. And that's where I ran into podiatry school. So podiatry school, like chiropractic school, like dental school, is different than traditional MD school. The trajectory is very similar for podiatry, but it's its own medical school. So there happened to be one in Harlem in New York City. So I was like, oh, that will allow me to be a doctor. It's medicine. I can do surgery if I want, but I can still be a trainer, which was feeding my soul, and live in New York City, that was feeding my soul. So it was kind of what fit into my needs at that point. And that's really, really honestly, how I became a podiatrist was based off of convenience of the medical school.
I want to know what your dad said when you said, Dad, I'm going to be a podiatrist. Like,
Yeah, pretty much.
what
His
was,
response.
did he like did his face fall and he went to go find like the liquor cabinet?
Probably. Which, I get it, because it would be like, why wouldn't you want to be the traditional medical doctor and be, a neurologist or a orthopedist, like a podiatry, feet? It's like the bottom of the body. It's dirty. It's gross. I mean, feet are gross. And there were, definitely times when I was going through podiatry school and residency that I was like, what the F am I doing? Like, this is gross. Like, I don't want to be cutting nasty toenails for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I can
But
imagine.
I was on that trajectory, and it's an expensive trajectory. Right? Like, the med school was very expensive. That I had to find what aspects of feet I find interesting and that I can connect my passion to. Because I'm not passionate about feet, meaning like, you have fungal infections, or you have, ingrown toenail. Like, I'm just like not passionate about that. But what I'm
Sure.
passionate about, because of being in fitness and being a former gymnast for 13 years, was movement. So I was like, okay, feet are connected. They're integral to movement. And to me, movement is beautiful, like a dancer or the way an athlete moves. Like, that is fascinating. And that people can connect to, and it's not gross. If I talk about how the foot of a ballet dancer and the movement that it allows her to do, suddenly feet don't become gross. If I talk about, maybe a diabetic foot with fungal nails, it's a different story. So that's where I had to connect my passion to the part of podiatry that would feed my soul.
Well, that's an interesting progression, but I can definitely relate to the idea of having to marry all of these different pieces, and then it leading you to a life that you clearly enjoy. And so I just want to highlight, for the whoever's listening, the podcast attendees, as it were. I want to highlight the fact that you have to be okay with switching lanes, and one of the big things we always talk about is, no matter whether it pays the bills, no matter whether it's the common sense path, does it feed your soul? Do you really want to work at a coal mine? If you don't want to work in a coal mine, if you don't want to, work that job, whatever it is, despite the constraints that you have built for yourself, is it possible for you to move, to slowly make your way away from whatever it is, or immediately make your way, whichever it is? But sit back and really think, is this the path that I want my life to be filled with? And, even Dr. Splichal, she's moving in this path. It's successful. Parents love it. And she says, nope. And so that can be you. That could be you. When you make the decision and start moving towards that. And I would encourage you, if this applicable, then please move forward towards a life that you would, more readily appreciate. So now you're doing your podiatry school, and you're going through residency. What was residency like? Because it sounds like it's not much fun.
No, residency is intense. Residency for a podiatrist is a residency like for every doctor. So this, again, like TV shows, I feel like everything there's a TV show you can compare it to. Where they have, I don't watch TV, but there's a TV show built around like residency. One of the doctor shows, where it's super intense. I had to do midnight rotations in the emergency room, and everyone at my program was very belittling and not respectful to me. And I'm going through that, and it's also all in, knee deep, feet all day. I couldn't find that balance between the aspects of New York that fed my soul, and then the aspects of fitness and movement that fed my soul. I had to kind of like pause those, and was all in podiatry in a very not healthy environment, and then was sleep deprived and very stressed, maybe very similar to the military, kind of like boot camp of you're stressing these people. But at that moment, I was like, this is not why I went to podiatry school. So I actually left residency.
Oh, yeah.
Which I don't recommend people doing, but this supports that life is not a straight path, and that we, I feel like a lot of successful are very zig and zaggy, like interesting, successful people, that their life was not a straight trajectory, that there were these side tangents of self-exploration and taking risks of certain career decisions or life decisions. So this was one of mine that I quit residency 9 months into a 3-year program.
Oh,
And
wow.
if you're doing that, you're potentially burning a bridge that
Yeah.
maybe I would never be able to come back. And then maybe I would never be able to get my medical license, which means I just wasted $250,000 on education to become a doctor. And then I could never be a doctor. But I just felt at that moment that that's what I needed to do. And I left and I went back to school. I went to graduate school and I got my master's in human movement, and just felt that I needed some other connection to feet, fitness, and movement. Like there was something that was missing in between my story, like in my story of connecting all of this from a career
Yeah.
path. And I didn't know that it would be this degree, but it was this degree that allowed me to take those different facets of my background and blend it into literally what my life is today, how I see patients, how I create my education company that we spoke before we started film or recording. And that education company completely changed my life because I traveled the world. And then that also led to the evolution of Naboso. So that risk of quitting residency to go back to school to get my master's was critical. Of course, I had to go back to residency, and thankfully I found a program that was accepting. It was completely different from an energy. They were positive. I didn't feel like I was belittled and, was disrespected. So I eventually did get my medical license, and obviously have been practicing since then, licensed, practicing. And
I'm a
yeah,
doctor.
like
Look.
exactly. But yeah, that was very critical to what shaped my background and my career. So the kind of these zigs and zags for me to leave forensics when I was on that trajectory and be like, I'm going to be a personal trainer, was huge. For me to, leave residency and, go back to school and get my master's and try to connect it, that was a huge risk or a zig within my trajectory, but it was a necessary one. I wouldn't be who I am today without some of these major, scary decisions, and almost like radical decisions, if you want to kind of use the name of your podcast, right? They're very scary to make those decisions. To quit something is very scary, but you look back and those are the most critical periods of change within your life.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. You're facing the fact that you're going to have to go back into residency. I mean, I am not a doctor, but I know enough that residency is hell. It's like it's hell in its reality, and then as you have seen, it's hell literally for, can be, just because of, interpersonal relationships and all these different things, pecking order between the resident and the doctor, and everybody who's not a doctor but wishes they were, and all these different things. So when you were staring down that path, help us understand what kept you moving that direction. Like, what was how did you do that? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So in both programs, even the second program where I was in residency that I said it was much better, it was very much centered around that there is this pecking order. And I don't think that people realize that with medicine. And I do think it's kind of like the military. It might be a little bit, maybe even worse in a sense, because
sure
even the janitor can, shit on the intern because they're the first year resident, and that's everyone in the hospital's job, is to just like make them feel like they're nothing.
That's
because
crazy.
it's the initiation process to toughen you, because you're really making these life and death decisions that if you don't have thick skin and this character of people kind of at you in a stressful situation, you can't fold, emotionally fold.
Right.
And I remember, I was in the OR doing surgery, and the nurses who, hand the instruments, and I would ask for instruments and they would just look at me and not hand me the instruments. like,
What?
like just give me the instrument. You
Here's
know what
a
I mean?
drill.
They would just like mess with you because they technically could, even
Oh,
though
wow.
as soon as I graduate and as soon as you become a second year resident, then a third year resident, like this stuff doesn't happen anymore. Um, so my way to get through it was that one, it's temporary, that it's an investment in the bigger goal, right?
Right.
Of what I want. That obviously I did want to be a doctor. I wanted to have, a certain career path, and that requires me to kind of play the game. That's kind of what I would tell myself also. Like, this is just a game,
Just playing the
and
game.
just play the game. Like, joke back, don't take it so seriously. And I feel that if you look at a lot of these things, it honestly is. And that outside of the walls of the hospital, these people are nobody. But in the wall of the hospital, they just kind of feed their ego in this like really messed up way. And that's actually their own issues that has nothing to do with me. That's their ego problem. Maybe they have like an unhappy marriage or something, and
Right.
they're taking it out on whoever they can. So you kind of feel bad about that. I often see kind of the human side of people and try to be really understanding of situations like that. But definitely the focusing on the end goal and what is the end result of it. Like a small pain today is, an investment for kind of the bigger rewards at the end.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's just similar to boot camp. Like it literally is like a boot camp. How mentally tough are you to get through the hell of boot camp?
Well, I can definitely relate to boot camp. And the truth is, my boot camp was hard, but it was nothing like I expected. I went in the Marine. I went in the Navy. So the Navy is kind of cream puff. From what I understand, the Marines are obviously quite, it's quite a bit more challenging. So one of the things that I always want to highlight in this podcast is depression and mental challenges and things like that. So when you were, have you ever dealt with the blues or depression and all of these stressful situations and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, no, I definitely did for sure in the first residency that I did, which was the one that I ended up leaving because they were so degrading and I was sleep
Mm,
deprived and I wasn't like feeding my soul in any way. I mean, I literally was some of the most depressed that I had ever been. And it really scared me. And I was like, this is not who I am. And, when you are depressed, you can also become a little bit angry
yeah,
that I
yeah.
was just not myself from that situation. And that fed into also me wanting to leave that residency. Was how I felt emotionally was just completely eating at my soul. And then also that it wasn't using podiatry in the way that fed my soul. So kind of that combination of that.
And so when you moved out of the situation, your soul was kind of free and you just, kind of woke back up.
Yes, yes. I mean, it wasn't easy per se because the entire time that I was getting my master's, it was hanging over my head of, will I ever go back? Will I ever be able to go back to residency? And then of course I had student loans that were kind of kicking in. So there's like a
Mm,
fear around like, okay, there's a major financial impact of that decision that I made. So that then, I don't know if that would be as much of a depressive state for me as an anxious state. So but it became a mental weight or burden
mm.
that decision had potential ramifications. And then, other times throughout my career, there would be that same thing of, I had said that I was traveling around the world for my education company,
Hmm.
but that was me leaving the country for 4 to 5 weeks at a clip by myself and going to all these countries back to back by myself, And, you start to get lonely, and I'm like teaching all day, to go to a hotel to teach all day. And I was just kind of like, is this what I also want? Like, you just kind of get kind of lost of like, is this what I want? Is this kind of speaking to my soul? What am I doing? I'm lonely. Am I lonely? I don't know. It becomes like self-exploration, and what you want and what feeds your soul is very, very hard to find. But I feel like you have to go through those different phases of potential self-doubt and maybe a little bit of depression, and like, is this it? Is this really it? And kind of like all facets of it. And you have to allow it to go through that for you to get to the end light. And I feel that now I am at that end light. It took years. For 10 years, I had been teaching and developing how I look at movement. And now, kind of in like years 8, 9, 10, kind of the latter part of this 10 years, I feel like I'm in this rhythm finally of everything is just in sync with what feeds my soul. And, me realizing that I'm not a healer. A lot of people go to medicine to be a healer. I'm not a healer. I'm an educator. And yes, I heal also, but once you identify with what characteristic of your career that feeds your soul, that's very freeing. So it took me a while to realize that my ability to educate feeds my soul. So if I'm a doctor and I see a patient, I have to educate the patient for it to feed my soul. If I just treat them and make them feel better and then they leave my office, that doesn't feed my soul in the same way. So I want the listeners to think that also, that you could be, let's say a lawyer, or, right, a professor, or whatever it is that you are. And maybe you aren't an educator, but you're something else, even though you are a professor. Like, there's different facets to every profession.
Yes.
And what characteristic of that profession feeds your soul?
Yes. That's one of the things I really want to make clear, which is it's not about perfection in your feeding your soul. Like, because sometimes it's people will sort of sit with where they are because they may know that they want to move towards, a different life, a better life, the thing that they really want to be, but they're too old, or they're, the situation isn't perfect. And so because it's not perfect, then they sort of choose to stay with what they have. And what you said about, maybe it's not so much about doing the thing perfectly. It's about doing the thing. It's about moving towards the thing that you would really rather be doing, even if you can't do it to perfection.
Oh, 100%. And what I would say, with the opportunity for me to travel the world for my education company, which was my first company, was literally people contacting me on Facebook because I was putting out content, because I said I like to educate, so I put out content. And then someone messaging me from Hong Kong and saying, can you come to Hong Kong and do one of your trainings? And just without a hesitation, yes. And then the more that you do that, versus like, wow, but I've never been to Hong Kong. I don't have a passport. How am I get there? I don't know anyone. What if they don't speak English? What am I? Just kind of like, yes. And just know that the rest of that process will figure itself out. And then every time you say yes to something like that, or you just take a step forward, then all these other opportunities start to align themselves around that as well.
I love that. I'm so glad. I dearly hope that the people listening really are able to take some of this on. And but I want to ask you a couple of questions. These are questions drawn from some podcasts that you'll find on neboso.com, Dr. Splichal's amazing product website. So the first question I have, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Pilates versus yoga, and a short little answer as to why one is more beneficial or useful than the other?
Which one is more? It depends on the individual of what they're looking for. If they're looking for stability, or if they are looking for mobility, I guess would help to guide them on
Okay.
that. Yeah. And so Pilates would be more stabilizing, and yoga would be more mobilizing.
So if you're just starting out and you're not really familiar with either, and you want to, start, evolving your attention to your body, shall we say? Which would you recommend first, a yoga or Pilates?
I would say to do sometimes. It honestly depends. There's so many fusion classes now that I feel yoga, you can find probably a little bit easier to do yoga on your own and you're new to it. Whereas Pilates, you need to have proper cueing and execution.
Yeah, I tell you, my one experience with Pilates, I never did it again. I came away. It was like 20 years ago, and I went to one Pilates class, and I couldn't walk straight for about 3 weeks. So I'm not sure what happened, but I heard something. And now, so the only other question I have is, there's this big debate about running shoes, flat shoes, toe shoes, and speaking from the word of God, as it were, the word of Emily. How do you feel about the running shoes versus the flat shoes?
So I'm much more supporter of the minimal shoes, natural shoes, because it allows you to kind of take advantage of your natural foot function. Although some people do need to have a little bit more support, which would be kind of a traditional shoe. A majority of my patients, I do convert them to the minimal shoes, like a Vibram or a Vivo Barefoot.
Vivo Barefoot. I actually use them. I've had two pairs of those Vivo Barefoots, and oh man, when I was in the Navy, I was like an evangelist. Like, you got to try these shoes. They're so awesome. But I see that you also have a shoe. You have the Naboso sandal. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so Zero Shoes actually licensed our material, and they built it into a sandal, which is one of their trail sandals. It's called the Naboso Trail. And it provides the structure of all of their Zero Shoes, but it brings the sensory stimulation of Naboso.
And I'm going to tell y'all, if you listen to my last podcast with Michael Mello, I didn't know what the heck Naboso was. I still don't remember how I happened upon the site or the technology. I got to be honest, I wouldn't have bought it if I hadn't bought it from Amazon, because I didn't know what it was, and it's not inexpensive, but I mean, I'm gonna tell you, I rolled that thing out and I stepped on it, and it blew my mind. I called my wife in. I'm like, you got to step on this. This is amazing. And so I'm a huge convert. So I really appreciate that. I'm not sure, I have a lot of mats. I think the Naboso is my third mat, and I've used the Naboso exclusively now. So I really appreciate the creation of this product. It's awesome.
Oh, awesome. Yes, you're so welcome. A lot of people respond that way the first time they use it. They're just kind of not knowing what to expect with the texture. But the texture on all of our products is really specific to stimulate these special nerves in the bottom of the feet that helps to stimulate your brain and tell your body where the feet and body are in space. So you could just say, oh, helps me feel my feet when I stand and I walk. Some people need that for medical reasons. Or, when you do more dynamic movement, let's say you're an athlete, the faster that you can feel your feet, that means the faster you can feel the ground. And then that's how you would stabilize your body during dynamic movement. So some really, really great applications with our insoles and with our mats.
And like I said, I love mine. I bought on Amazon. So if it didn't work, if it wasn't cool, it would have went back, but I'm keeping it. It's awesome. Highly recommended. So with that, we know your Naboso.com website. If someone wants to find you on Facebook or Instagram, how would they find you, Emily Splichal?
Yep. So on Instagram, I am at Dr. Emily DPM. So Dr. Emily DPM is my Instagram. It's also on Facebook, just my name, Emily Splichal, Dr. Emily Splichal. And then Naboso is on both Facebook and Instagram. That's NABOSO_technology. And then my education company, if people want to learn more about feet, maybe they do, is EBFA Global.
All right. That's amazing. I highly recommend that you check her out. She does some amazing work, especially with older people. And because, the truth is that fall risks as you get older increase, and the realities of falling and breaking something when you're 60 are dramatically different compared to when you may be like, say, 20 or something. So her technology and her concepts are being used, and I highly appreciate that, because my mom is, I think she's 76. So she's definitely one of those people that may benefit from the tech. And with that, we just have one other thing. In your whole life, you have lived experience, doctor training, podiatrist training, all these different things. What is your one major tip for our listeners?
As it relates to life or for movement?
It can be life, it can be medicine, it can be like we talked about on our last show with Michael Mello. We talked about just drink more water. That drinking more water, is literally one of the absolute best things you can do, because 9 times out of 10 people don't drink enough water. So it's just, the floor is open, whatever you want to, however you want to bring it.
I mean, my go-to that I would say that relates to what my philosophy in life is to never stop reading. So always read. Always grow your knowledge base. You have never learned everything there is to know.
Yes. I'm with you. I firmly believe that never stop learning. That's one of the things. If you start looking at the people who have amazing lives, they're super successful, they're rich, they're influential, the movers and the shakers of the world, so to speak. One of the defining characteristics is that they are avid readers. Mm-hmm. And so I would encourage anybody listening to just start slow. If you don't read now, just say, okay, this week I'm going to read a book. And then kind of grow it, to shoot for, 4 books in a month or whatever it is, but just sort of start working at adding reading and writing, hopefully journaling into your life, because those are some of the key differences between the super successful and, what you might call the everyman who wants change in his life. So definitely explore if those things are meaningful for you. And with that, I just want to say thank you to Emily Splichal. It's been awesome. It's been super fun. It's always really cool to do these podcasts with, amazing people. And certainly you are one of them. And I really appreciate you being on.
Of course. Thank you so much.
And with that, I just want to say real quick, be kind to yourself. Always, always, always. If you have a thought, if you have a feeling, if you have an emotion, and it's not something that you would want your best friend to think or feel, then by all means, feel free to question it and decide whether or not it's a useful thought for you. And with that, I really want to thank my guest, Dr. Emily Splichal, and peace, y'all.